I don't need to ask you how you're doing, because obviously things are not too well for you and the Nigerian public. But let's start off with how you made it into Ghana. What was your story? How did you leave Niger? Even when the coup happened, when you were in that country, how did you run for your life and to make it right into the Republic of Ghana?
Thank you for everything. But before answering your question, I want to correct something.
Right.
I'm not the former chief of staff. I'm the chief of staff of the president of the Republic of Niger.
You don't accept that you've been deposed?
Mohamed Bazoum, who is still the elected president of Niger, then is not the former president. He is the president of the Republic of Niger, the elected one. This attempt to depose him is still ongoing, and it will finish in
So you don't even accept that you've been deposed?
No. Bazoum is still the president of the Republic of Niger, recognized by all the countries in the world, except of course Mali and Burkina Faso, that are in the same situation.
But you can't go back home now because your president is no more. There's a new prime minister, there's a new cabinet.
Il n'y a pas de premier ministre, il n'y a pas de nouveau cabinet, tout ça est nul et de nul effet. Le président Mohamed Bazoum est le président de la République du Niger et le seul président de la République du Niger reconnu par tous.
So basically what he's trying to say, and for those of you who may not understand, is that they do not accept being the former chief of staff. He does not, first of all, accept that there's a new cabinet. He does not accept that there's a new president. He does not accept that there's a new leader of the Nigerian people. All he accepts right now is the fact that there is only one president in the Republic of Niger, and that is President Mohamed Bazoum, who was democratically elected. Now, I'm going to ask you about President Mohamed Bazoum, because I need to ask you how he's doing right now, how he's faring. After the coup d'etat happened, you were there trying to fight back. It didn't work, so you left, but he's being detained now. How is he feeling now as we speak?
Le président de la République va très bien. Il a le moral très haut et il est prêt à se battre pour la démocratie, pour la liberté, pour la justice au Niger. Donc le président de la République va très bien, il a le moral très très haut. Certes, les conditions de vie sont déplorables parce que depuis l'événement du 26 juillet, la junte a mis tout en œuvre pour le démoraliser, pour le faire ramener à un état réduit, mais c'est sans compter sur sa force morale. Donc le président de la République va très bien.
Okay, so basically he's making the point that when you talk about President Mohamed Bazoum, he's in high spirit, good spirit. In fact, morally, his morale is high. He's not down or, you know, dampened. His spirit is not dampened by the fact that there's a new military junta that is controlling the country, except to say that he's been detained. And naturally, when you're detained, your rights are restricted. You do not have the right to move. You do not have the right to make certain natural, you know, adjustments which he would have done when he was head of state. So that is the only confinement in which he finds himself, except to say that he still believes that he's the president of the republic and is in good spirit. I guess that's the point, the import of what the point you're making. Now, you're saying that he's in good health. If he's in good health and is in a high morale, he's been deposed by the military junta, and we've seen the military junta receiving a lot of support. I don't know if it's just my impression, but they seem to be receiving a lot of support. You take a look at when the coup happened, they staged a rally at a stadium, and in that stadium, lots of people filling up the stadium to capacity. It does suggest that there's just something right with this coup d'etat and the military regime that is controlling. People appear to be supporting them. Is that not the case?
Sur ça, ce que je veux vous dire, d'abord, sachez que dans des situations comme ça, c'est toujours le populisme qui prend le dessus sur tout ce qui est rationnel. Alors, donc, la junte nigérienne n'a pas fait exception. Quand il y a eu le coup d'État, la vraie manifestation s'est tenue le premier jour du coup d'État. Il y avait eu une manifestation spontanée. Moi, j'étais dans la manifestation, j'avais conduit cette manifestation. C'était des milliers et des milliers de Nigériens qui étaient sortis pour dire non au coup d'État. Ils ont tiré à balles réelles sur les gens. 4 personnes étaient sévèrement blessées. C'est ce qui a démotivé les gens ce jour-là. Après, eux-mêmes, pour se donner bonne conscience, ils ont organisé un simulacre de manifestation où ils ont pris toutes les nouvelles recrues des militaires, les nouvellement recrues, et leurs familles, qu'ils ont habillés en t-shirt. Certains d'ailleurs n'ont pas eu le temps de se déshabiller, d'enlever leur habit militaire pour mettre leur habit civil quand ils sont venus à la manifestation. Et si vous regardez, quand ils ont attaqué l'ambassade de France, celui qui a été blessé au pied, que vous voyez dans les manifestations qu'on avait prises, c'est un colonel-major de l'armée. Donc, les manifestants ne sont pas des gens, des civils qui sont contents, la plupart qui sont contents du régime militaire.
Why are you arguing so? Why so?
Parce que c'est ce que je veux de vous dire. La plupart des manifestants, quand vous regardez même à la télévision, ils ont encore le treillis militaire, le t-shirt militaire. Et celui qui a été blessé à l'ambassade de France le jour où ils ont fait la grande manifestation, parce que la riposte a fait que les gens étaient obligés de tirer des gaz lacrymogènes sur eux. Il y a un qui était blessé au pied, c'était un colonel-major de l'armée. Donc ça veut dire que la plupart des manifestants, ce sont des éléments, les nouvelles recrues de l'armée qu'ils ont fait sortir. Ça c'est un premier point. Le deuxième point, sachez que le Niger compte 8 régions. Parmi les 8 régions, c'est uniquement Niamey où il y a eu des manifestants. Dans toutes les capitales, c'est l'opposition qui est forte en Afrique. Principalement au Niger, l'opposition est très forte à Niamey. Donc ils ont fait sortir les militants de l'opposition. Le parti politique de l'opposition du leader Hama Amadou qui est à Paris actuellement, il a écrit une lettre pour demander à ces gens de sortir pour soutenir la manifestation. Donc voilà la manifestation de Niamey. Mais quand vous regardez les médias, quand vous regardez les télévisions, vous voyez que dans tous les pays, dans toutes les autres régions, nos gens ont manifesté, y compris à Niamey, où ils ont été tirés à balles réelles.
So basically the point the former chief of staff is making is that we should disregard what is happening on the televisions as we see it, and also making the point that what we have is that the military is just inviting people to create the impression as though they have legitimacy, but they do not have legitimacy based on what we're seeing on the screens, and that they are just bringing their cronies and bringing people who align with them to fill the stadium. So we shouldn't believe what we're seeing on the television. Beyond that, the second point is that Niamey is the smallest region out of the 8 regions that we have in the Republic of Niger, except to say that when you take a look at all of the regions in the Republic of Niger, Niamey is the smallest, although it is the capital. Now that side has a lot of support from the opposition political parties, and we had leading figures of the opposition political parties that incited the public against President Mohamed Bazoum, a reason for which it is creating the impression as though nationally there is support for the military, except to say that in the capital, as we speak, they do not have support or legitimacy. So that's the point you're making.
That's my colleague Blessed Soga interacting with the former chief of staff of the deposed President Bazoum of Niger. We are going to zoom into that conversation right away, and I've been joined by Professor Kojo Epieje-Etia. He's an international law analyst, and Adib Sani is a security analyst. Let me say welcome to you, Prof. and Adib. And just before we start that conversation, by way of setting a tone, let me just bring in these very fine details that we've collected over the period since that coup happened some time ago. So this is the ECOWAS military action in Niger. The question is, can Ghana afford to deploy? So ECOWAS has activated a standby force for possible intervention, and we've heard from our very own Defense Minister, Dominic Nitowol, saying the military is ready. Now, the ECOWAS Committee of Chief of Defense Staff meeting happened in Burma camp yesterday and today. So we brought you details of what happened yesterday, including that interaction you just saw Blessed having. Now, so here are the timelines, right? We know that there was a certain ultimatum given to the junta in Niger to return the country to democratic rule. But that ultimatum has elapsed, and so the status is that it has failed. We understand, though, that even though there is a military intervention or a standby force has been activated, there are still diplomatic negotiations happening. We know that some people have tried both, from the African continent and even internationally. We know that people of high diplomatic repute have tried to speak to the junta to return the country to democratic rule. So those are pending, diplomatic negotiations and military intervention. Now, here is what the ECOWAS standby force looks like, right? So it's a brigade of 5,000 troops. The projected annual cost will be $2.3 billion. Now, for deployment of troops on demand, the projected annual cost is $360 million. So we're still bringing you the highlights or the story so far since the Niger coup and all the important details. Now, this one has to do with the points of disagreement. When you look at the minority in Ghana's parliament, it wants a promotion of the respect for international law, treaty obligations, and the settlement of international disputes by peaceful means. The majority in parliament also wants adherence to the principles enshrined in, or as the case may be, the aims and ideals of the Treaty of ECOWAS. Now, this is an interesting picture of what the armed forces personnel in ECOWAS countries look like. So in Cape Verde or Cabo Verde, you have 1,000, and in Senegal, 19,000. The Gambia has 4,000. Guinea-Bissau, 4,000. Sierra Leone, 9,000. Liberia has 2,000. Then you come to Guinea, which has 13,000. Cote d'Ivoire, 134,000. Ghana has 16,000. Togo has 10,000. Mali, 21,000. Niger, 10,000. Burkina Faso, 11,000. Benin, 12,000. And Nigeria has a staggering 223,000. And this is the armed forces personnel in the sub-region. Now, when it comes to budget allocations, and we do it in Ghana cedis, contingency budget needed. Headquarters and agencies need about 3.74 billion. Construction of forward operating base or a northern border security, we need 262.1 million cedis. For defense advisory services, we need 10 million cedis. And ammunitions and other accoutrements, we need 10.21 million cedis. Again, this is in Ghana cedis. So I'm sure the premise has been set. Let me now bring in Professor Kojo Appiah-Etua. Good morning to you, Prof, and I appreciate your time here on the show. Quickly, let's delve into the aspect of international law in this particular matter. We heard yesterday from ECOWAS and ECOWAS reps who dismissed claims that ECOWAS needs the express permission of the UN Security Council before invading Niger. Your quick thoughts on how this has panned so far and the international law dimensions.
Thank you for having me. Yes, the first point we need to establish is that what the military junta did in Niger constitutes a violation of international law. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights has made a ruling brought in by Jawara, the former president of the Gambia, that where a coup d'etat takes place, it violates the sovereignty of the country, as well as the self-determination of the people of that country. And so that situation calls for a restoration of democracy. And it also is international law, the principle of recognition of government. Recognition of government is acknowledgement of existence of a government, and this comes about where there is an unconstitutional change in government. And so the OAU, before its demise, identified certain situations where there's a change in government that could constitute or could be termed as
I'm sorry, Prof. I'm really struggling to hear you, if you don't mind, and if you can you speak up a bit?
Is it better? I've tried to reposition myself.
Much better.
Okay, so I'm saying that the OAU, before its demise, also brought in some elements we call unconstitutional changes in government, where there's a coup d'etat, where there is mercenary activity, where soldiers from outside the country is brought into the country to constitute a change in government. And then where there is a civil war, changing government through civil war, like what happened in Liberia and former Zaire. And then we also have a situation where a government refuses to leave office after elections have been held. And we have several examples on the continent. Then the fifth one being a situation where the constitution of the country is changed. Normally it's a two-term process, but the constitution is changed to allow for a third term. And that is found in the African Charter of Democracy, Elections, and Governance. So if we put these issues on the table, certainly we have a situation where there's a violation of the rights of the people of Niger. And I was listening to one of the ministers or whoever from Niger saying that the survey indicates that the people are not in support of the situation. So there are two governments here. The government that has come to power through illegal means, that is now the military government, and the government that is considered as the legitimate government led by Bazoum. So ECOWAS is saying that it is giving recognition, collective recognition to the Bazoum government. So in the eyes of ECOWAS, the Bazoum government is the government that is in power. The military doesn't seem to exist. And if Bazoum was out of the country right now, he would have sat in any ECOWAS meeting representing the people of Niger. And so in that context, we can see that Bazoum can ask for military intervention to enable democracy to be restored in Niger. And so ECOWAS can go on that basis to intervene. But that is a legal aspect of it. The question then is where the security people come into the picture.
Right.
Do we have what it takes to go to Niger and orchestrate a return to democratic governance? And so in that situation, there is also a place for international law. That is the use of diplomacy, and the use of peaceful means to resolve the problem. And I think ECOWAS sort of jumped the gun by immediately giving an ultimatum to the government, the military government, to return the country to democratic rule in 1 week. Normally, the procedure that the African Union has set does not give such a short time frame for a return to constitutional rule. And the process is also not through as ECOWAS has gave away to
so Prof,
the government to accept. Yes.
So Prof, do I get the impression that you don't agree with those who say that ECOWAS needs the permission of other bodies like AU, the UN, before invading Niger?
No, the UN, they don't need the permission of the UN to go to Niger. The AU has already given its permission or has endorsed what ECOWAS is doing. Usually the two work together. So the AU has given its, has endorsed what ECOWAS should do in Nigeria. And we can rely on Article 4H of the AU Constitutive Act, which calls for intervention where there is instability or where there is a likelihood of genocide or other crimes against humanity, international crimes being committed. And in that situation, the Peace and Security Council of the AU will meet and make a decision that there should be an intervention to restore order. And I understand that a meeting has taken place, and ECOWAS and AU has endorsed the ECOWAS decision. So that, on the face of it, is settled. But then the question is, diplomacy is not off the table. So initially, there should be the process that the OAU sets for the AU is that there should be a delegation sent to the country to negotiate, to let diplomacy prevail. Then there will be an agreement that the country should return to constitutional rule. And here, the government that has come to power through illegal means could be allowed to return the country to constitution and take part in the election. But the difficulty or the problem with that OAU approach is that the government that is overthrown is not allowed to take part in the new election. So that is the gap that is there that needs to be settled. And so as we speak now, what needs to be done to ensure that the rules of diplomacy are exhausted before the military action will come in is for the junta to allow ECOWAS delegation to go in there and negotiate to ensure that democracy is restored. And I think it will be the position is that where a country, a military regime comes to power, the military regime itself should not be allowed to take part in the election. And so it is rather the deposed government that should be allowed to take part in the election to test if legitimacy is still the people or not. But in a situation where the dynamics, for example, Wagner, that's the Russian paramilitary regime, is on the wings, and where Russia is asserting its influence in the sub-region, the dynamics have changed. And so probably as a way of compromising, the military regime may be allowed to take part in elections, but they have to civilianize themselves. They cannot stand as commander or captain or whoever. They should be civilians. And then they can stand for the elections, and then the deposed regime should also be allowed to take part as a way of compromise so that democracy is returned to the country.
Prof, there's another angle, a legal one as such, but this is local. So we have the minority in parliament saying that, you know what, President Akufo-Addo, we know that a certain level of commitment has been assured ECOWAS when it comes to Ghanaian troops participating in this invasion, but you need to come to parliament to get the thoughts of Ghanaians and also hear from legislators. Your thoughts on that?
Our constitution doesn't call for the government in power seeking the permission of Parliament before it undertakes such a mission. And we have done other missions where Parliament's approval was not sought. So if you go to Article 40 of our Constitution, it talks about diplomacy and peace, attempts to resolve the matter through peaceful means. It also talks about adhering to the values and norms of the international relations that the country is a party to, including the UN, the Commonwealth, the AU, ECOWAS, and so on. So Article 73 also talks about the fact that in respecting international law, we should also consider our self-interest, national interest. So while there is no direct law saying that the government should take the permission of Parliament, it is in the interest of the country for the President to do so that there will be that consensus. And if you look at the general discussion around the issue, it looks like the majority of Ghanaians are saying that we should not intervene militarily. So that should influence the decision by the government. However, what I see is that ECOWAS is engaging in saber rattling. It is not necessarily saying that we are going to Niger tomorrow to intervene, because the military analysts will tell you that it takes about 3 months or something. We need the budget, we need the logistics, and so on and so forth. So it is not going to be something that is going to happen today. But they want to create the impression that we are ready to go in. So it's a carrot and stick approach that the ECOWAS is adopting. But the government should be clear about it with the minority so that there is that consensus and understanding, so that they will get the support of the people of Ghana that the military resort will be the last resort, so that there will be that understanding going forward.
Do you get a sense that this is quite rushed?
Certainly, yes. Certainly. ECOWAS rushed by giving the regime a 1 week ultimatum to return the country to constitutional rule. The OAU rules, as I mentioned earlier, don't say that. It says that the delegations be allowed to send in to negotiate for return to constitutional rule. And then they will give the military regime a couple of months, maybe 3 months, 6 months to organize elections, and then a new regime, a constitutionally elected regime will come into place. So ECOWAS took some missteps here. And so ECOWAS needs to, I think, admit that. But at the same time, having already given that threat, they do not want to be seen as a two-place bulldog. They want to still accept themselves that they can do it. And so that is what has put ECOWAS in a sort of quagmire. But I think going forward, indirectly, they can bring diplomacy ahead of the military threat so that diplomacy will be allowed to work, and force will come in as a last resort. Because even if you look at the rules on international humanitarian law, the just war theory says that if you are going to war and it will lead to an escalation and it will create less stability in the country, you don't go to war. Even though you have the right to go, you don't go. Okay, so if I recall my biblical principle, it says that everything is illegal, but everything may not be necessary. So that is how ECOWAS should approach the matter. They rush in taking the decision, and they don't want to retreat, but they can still give room for diplomacy to take the lead, and then we can see a solution to the problem.
Prof, give me a few minutes to engage Adib Sani. He's a security analyst, and I'll come back to you for your concluding thoughts. Thank you for joining the program, Adib. So we've been hearing from yourself and other experts. Even prior to this coup d'etat, there were suggestions that it would happen. And true to the words of some of your colleagues, like Professor Enin, this has occurred. But it appears that ECOWAS is quite adamant on its decision to invade Niger, again, against the advice of some security analysts. I just want to know what your quick thoughts are on this particular decision and the role of Ghana in all of this.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Indeed, Ghana has a very important role to play within the local, sub-regional, and international scheme of things. In 1999, there was a protocol that was initiated, and it's made up of 9 state members, okay? And it was a protocol on conflict prevention, management, resolution, peacekeeping, and of course, security. And before that, it was only the UN that had its capability. And I'll cite Article 39 of the UN Charter that states that the Security Council shall determine the existence of any threat to the peace, breach of peace, or act of aggression, and shall make recommendations or decide what measures shall be taken in accordance with Article 41 and 42 to maintain or restore international peace and security. So within even the wider UN level, there is the need to act if there's any threat to international peace and security. Now, we can narrow it down to the AU level. And we have a constitutive act of the African Union. And to be specific, Article 4H establishes the right of the Union to intervene in a member state to prevent grave violations of human rights. Now, let's narrow it down to ECOWAS. And the mechanism on conflict prevention, management, resolution, peacekeeping, and security, Article 25 clearly spells out the conditions for application. It says, the mechanism shall be applied in any of the following circumstances: in cases of aggression or conflict in any member state or threat thereof. 2, in case of conflict between 2 or several member states. In case of internal conflicts, A, that threatens to trigger a humanitarian disaster, and B, that poses a serious threat to peace and security in the sub-region. Now, take note of the B. That poses a serious threat to the peace and security in the sub-region. So you see, we have every legal means to go into Niger, okay, to restore constitutional democracy. However, we need to ask ourselves certain questions, like Prof indicated. What is the feasibility? What is the practicability? How possible is this? Is war a walk in the park? When Russia invaded Ukraine, they thought it was a special military operation. Now it has become a full-blown war, and it has gotten to a stalemate. We need to ask ourselves, how about our economies? Already, Ghana has gotten an IMF bailout. With what money are we going to war? Nigeria is debt-stricken, over $100 billion. Already, we have issues of human insecurities. Just last year, according to the World Bank, close to 1 million Ghanaians were pushed into the poverty bracket. Nigeria, as we speak, has the highest number of people living below the poverty line in the whole world, even more than India, over 100 million Nigerians. Would our economies be able to withstand that force? Let's also ask ourselves, what opportunities might we be creating for terrorist groups that are active all over the subcontinent? Because according to the Global Terrorism Index, Burkina Faso is the second most impacted country in the world last year after Afghanistan. We have a lot of terrorist activities, especially even in Niger, that even resulted into an ambush in which 4 American soldiers were killed in 2017, popularly known as the Tongo Tongo ambush. Nigeria is still dealing with Boko Haram and ISIS in West Africa province. What opportunities are we creating for them?
I like that. I like that you've opened this box of the issue of terrorists taking advantage of the situation, because it's something that has come to mind a lot of times. Because quite recently we heard of a scenario like that where the military in Niger suggested that it was an activity carried out by these extremists. Let's look at as ECOWAS as a regional body, already struggling with some of these coups that have been enforced prior to the Niger situation, having to deal with insurgencies, having to deal with extremist attacks, and now Niger. Now, some have described Niger as the hotbed, i.e., if we don't get Niger right, there's likely going to be a bad repercussion for the rest of the sub-region. We've just heard from Prof, who thinks that this decision to invade was quite rushed by ECOWAS. Do you agree? Are we treading on dangerous grounds? Are we on the right path?
Okay, so the thing is, there cannot be justification for coups. Coups takes you decades back, and soldiers don't have a magic wand where they can just change your fortunes overnight. Things don't happen that way. And in the past, I've been very vociferous in my criticism of ECOWAS for not able to bite beyond the bark. So I think this is an opportunity for ECOWAS to reassert some level of influence within the sub-region. However, they are hastily doing it, and they are being unstrategic, and they are not taking into consideration the various nuances, the various issues that might arise as a result. Now, we are even talking about a wider sub-regional security ramification, because we're talking about Burkina Faso and, of course, Mali, that has stated categorically that any intervention in Niger would amount to a declaration of war against us. Chad says, we are not so keen on, being part of it. Yeah. Algeria, which is not a member of ECOWAS, says, we don't want to have anything to do with it. Libya, as we speak, is in turmoil. They've been fighting for the past few days because a commander from another side was caught. And the possibility of weapons coming into Niger because of the war and trickling down to the littorals, including Ghana, is very high. Okay, talking about the terrorist groups who flourish, so to speak, when there's chaos. And I'll give you some examples. When Siad Barre was removed in Somalia, there was a power vacuum over a long time, and guess what? Al-Shabaab filled the vacuum. When America invaded Iraq, there was, sectarian violence between Shia, Sunnis, and all that. And guess what? Abu Musab al-Zarqawi reformed al-Qaeda in Iraq that filled the vacuum. In the 1990s, when there was chaos in Sudan, guess what? Al-Qaeda came in and filled that vacuum. So terrorists love it when there's chaos. Are we ready for the implications? And Ghana, I must say, has been untouched by the terrorism menace. We've been fairly peaceful. I mean, if you compare us to other countries, are we ready for the fallout, the possibility of our security getting compromised? Okay, so in everything we do, we also need to take into consideration the national interest. Are we ready for the political fallout that might arise as a result of body bags brought home containing remains of our soldiers? Happened when Nigeria intervened, in fact, when ECOWAS intervened in Liberia and Sierra Leone, Nigeria funded almost about 90% of it. And in the end, about 1,500 Nigerians were killed as a result of that. Even this was an intervention, so to speak, to create peace, you know. And now we're talking about a military intervention to restore constitutional democracy. We think it's going to come that easy. We need to get strategic rather than getting emotional about this.
Right. So, in wrapping up the conversation, Prof, let me come to you before Adib finalizes it for us. We find ourselves at a crossroads, I must say. ECOWAS is bent on carrying out this invasion. There are some who have suggested that ECOWAS probably just wants to flex its muscles, wants to prove that it's not a weak institution. It can bite hard when it wants to. Meanwhile, we know that there are talks, there are people of very high influence who are trying to get things done, even from the US and other places. So, for you, where you sit, and I must admit that this is not as simple as it may appear to many people. There's a lot of undercurrent playing as well. The former Nigerian president, Bazoum himself, and the undercurrents that are at play in this entire political situation that we are seeing in Niger. What is that one thing that for you will signal our direction towards a successful one, either a successful invasion or successful diplomatic conversation at restoring constitutional or democratic rule in Niger?
Understand what may have provoked this coup and other coup d'etat that have been rearing up especially in the West African fabric. As if you listen to the coup makers, they always cite security as the reason for coming to power. But if you look at security, the security they are talking about is a traditional understanding of state security, where you have the military manning the borders and arms that are used to ensure that there is no invasion and so on. But that aspect of security has its importance has waned, especially in this period of democracy and respect for human rights and the rule of law. So gradually, people are moving, nations and international relations are moving towards the recognition of human security, which the AU Constitutive Act itself recognizes and gives serious attention to. The ECOWAS also has a number of protocols that hang on respect for human security. So if we see that the issue from that angle, we are saying that the situation in Niger, for example, is because governance, there is mismanagement, and there is lack of respect for human rights. People don't have jobs and so on. That is why the EU, for example, sprang up in support of the coup d'etat without really understanding the dynamics, some waving Russian flags and so on. I think that the solution to the problem is that whether there's going to be a peace agreement or whether there's going to be a sort of understanding of returning the country to constitutional rule, there should be room for respect for democracy and the rule of law. And I'm saying that ECOWAS should stop being a firefighting machine and making sure that steps are taken to prevent coup d'etat. And we should also understand that when we talk about unconstitutional changes in government, It's not just a coup d'etat, it's not just military activity to change government, it's not just civil war, but also the refusal of government to leave office when their time is up or when they lose elections. And at the third meeting, where a number of African countries are doctoring their constitution to allow for unlimited terms in power. So when we understand the dynamics this way, when there's a need for room to apply diplomacy, we are saying that these measures should be respected. And that is how we can prevent or offset any future coup d'etat. And if it has to be military intervention, it has to be a last resort. And it is better to adopt that approach. Let's live in an unconstitutional regime where ultimately there could be room for return to democracy than to cause a likely havoc, instability in the sub-region, considering what Sani has said about terrorist activities and so on. We are opening the gaps for them. And I'm sure they are sitting there laughing that we have the opportunity to step in. So we need to be very careful about that, so that at the end of the day, diplomacy is giving room to work. The military is able to ensure that the Nigerian military is able to ensure that they deal with the terrorist issues and to be able to move the country forward. Democracy is the way to go, but if we are not careful and we rock the boat, then we may lose democracy as well completely. And Russia is also a country that supports such an approach. Russia is less interested in democracy. Same with China, which also has strong strategic interest in Niger as well. So we need to be careful to ensure that when we want to play the democratic game, we are careful we don't cause instability, which can easily affect the sub-region, which is already facing some instability challenges here and there.
Right. Thank you so much, Prof. Let me end with you, Adib. So, once again, we see Ghana appearing to be, at the front of this, and I'm saying this because, this meeting was held in Accra, 1. 2, we know that the former chief of staff of the deposed president in Niger is here in Ghana, seeking refuge here in Ghana. What signals do these send about Ghana and our role in this entire thing? And also, what must we be doing internally to protect ourselves from any possible opportunity that this may give to other people who want to take advantage of the situation?
Question. But I see a lot of people talking about a meeting in Ghana, to plan a war. I don't think that is the essence of that meeting. Theirs is to assess to the feasibility of any intervention.
But why Ghana though? Why Ghana? Because that's the miscommunication. And again, anybody could take it as a signal of, Ghana saying, don't worry, we're ready to host the meeting. I mean, I'm not saying that's what happens, but how people interpret some of these things. And Ghana appears to be quite pivotal in the conversations. And so there are those who are harboring fears that we may be projecting ourselves for, something untoward.
Yeah, we need to be very careful in order not to cow to pressure from any other place, because we have the opportunity to make history either positively or negatively. Negatively, if we decide to go to war, because it would go down in history as Ghana having been the country where the war was perhaps initiated. On the other hand, I am hoping that we go positively when we would explore other means. And it's quite obvious that the military intervention would come as a last resort, but we would still have to explore the diplomatic options as well. And I am very optimistic that in the end, that is what is going to be communicated. But before I go, you see, we need to talk about some fundamental issues. And I heard Prof talking about the fact that even civilians extending their stay in office and all that. And it's well articulated for students of security. They can go check it out. The African Union Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, Chapter 8, Article 23 is very specific about what constitutes coups. It's not only soldiers that stage coups, even civilians stage coups, and that one we call it constitutional coup. When you manipulate the constitution so you are able to extend your stay in power, when you engage in electoral malfeasance, election fraud, it's constitutional coup because it subverts the will of the people. Okay, so let's not be mistaken to thinking that it is only soldiers who engage in coup. And finally, and this is extremely important, there's too much misinformation and disinformation about Niger-French relationship. Let me say categorically, as a student of security and as a researcher, when the French intervened in Niger, trust me, it's public information. You can check. The number of terrorist attacks reduced significantly when you compare it to Mali and Burkina Faso. And the French have supported in so many ways, in even killing some, terrorist leaders. And I also heard about the fact that 1 out of 3 bombs are what we call it, powered by Nigerian uranium. No, France only relies on 10% of Nigerian uranium. And the companies, the French companies that mine uranium, guess what? 99% of the workers are Nigerians, okay? And I see an attempt by a third force to fill the vacuum like it did in other countries. And trust me, it's not going to bring anything better, but rather reduce the whole thing to a mercenary rule. And we need to be extremely careful about that.
Thank you so much for your time this morning. Adib Sani is a security analyst. Earlier you heard Professor Kojo Appiagyei-Etua, an international law analyst, also speaking on the latest in Niger. Well, coming up shortly, government is working towards a more sustainable way of distributing pre-mixed fuel to fishermen. That's my next conversation. Do stay.